The gunshot split the winter air like thunder, and Olivia Greene didn't wait to see who fired it before her legs carried her into the dark forest beyond the saloon. Her breath came in ragged gasps as branches clawed at her wool coat, and her boots slipped on patches of ice hidden beneath the snow. Behind her, she could hear the heavy footfalls of someone giving chase, their curses cutting through the freezing night. She had no idea why this stranger wanted her, only that she'd caught him watching her through the window of the boarding house where she worked, his eyes cold and calculating in a way that made her blood run cold. When he'd followed her to the saloon where she was delivering linens, she'd known she had to run. The winter of 1884 had descended on Eureka, California with a vengeance unusual for the northern region. While snow wasn't uncommon in the mountains surrounding the old gold rush town, this year the cold had come early and stayed late, freezing the creeks and rivers solid. Olivia's lungs burned as she pushed herself faster, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was 22 years old, and in all her years since arriving in California from Ohio after her parents died, she'd never been so terrified. The man behind her was gaining ground. She could hear his breathing now, harsh and determined. "Stop running, girl. I just want to talk to you." His words meant nothing. Olivia had seen the knife at his belt, the way his hand had rested on it when he'd cornered her outside the saloon. She'd heard the stories from other women in town about strangers who came through, men who thought women alone in the world were easy prey. She would rather freeze to death in these woods than let him catch her. The trees thinned ahead, and Olivia felt a surge of hope until she realized what lay before her: the creek. In summer, it was a gentle stream that wound through the forest, but now it was a ribbon of ice gleaming in the moonlight. She didn't have time to think, didn't have time to test whether the ice would hold her weight. The man was so close she could hear him fumbling for something in his coat, and she launched herself forward onto the frozen surface. The ice held for exactly 3 steps. The crack was deafening, and then the world went white and cold beyond anything she'd ever imagined. The water beneath the ice was so cold it felt like knives driving into every inch of her skin. She tried to scream, but water filled her mouth instead. Her heavy coat immediately soaked through, dragging her down. She thrashed, trying to find the surface, but the current was pulling her under the ice. Panic seized her chest as firmly as the cold, and her vision began to darken at the edges. Strong hands grabbed her arm, then her collar, hauling her up with such force that she gasped, coughing and choking on air and water. Someone was pulling her out of the water, dragging her across the ice toward the far bank. She couldn't feel her legs, couldn't feel anything except the terrible cold and the grip on her coat that wouldn't let go. "I've got you. Hold on, I've got you." The voice was deep, steady, nothing like the harsh threats of her pursuer. Olivia tried to focus on the face above her, but her vision was blurred with creek water and tears. She was lifted entirely off the ground, cradled against a broad chest, and then they were moving quickly through the trees. She wanted to tell him about the man chasing her, wanted to warn him, but her teeth were chattering so hard she couldn't form words. "You're going to be all right," the voice said again. "My camp's just ahead. We need to get you warm now." Olivia became dimly aware of orange light flickering between the trees, and then they emerged into a small clearing where a campfire burned bright. A horse stood tethered nearby, a tall bay gelding who lifted his head curiously as they approached. The man carrying her moved with purpose, setting her down gently near the fire before immediately stripping off her soaking coat. "No," Olivia managed through chattering teeth, trying to hold on to the coat with hands that wouldn't cooperate. "You'll die if we don't get these wet clothes off you," the man said firmly. His hands were already working at the buttons of her dress. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you're going into shock. Trust me." Something in his tone made her stop fighting. Through her blurred vision, she could see him better now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell to his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. His eyes were an unusual color, somewhere between green and brown, and they held nothing but concern as he worked to peel away her frozen clothing. "There was a man," she forced out, "chasing me." The cowboy's hands paused for just a moment, and his jaw tightened. "I heard the commotion, heard someone crashing through the woods, saw you go through the ice." He pulled a thick wool blanket from his bedroll and wrapped it around her shoulders as he removed her dress, preserving her modesty while working efficiently to get the wet fabric away from her skin. "Is he still out there?" "I don't know." Olivia's whole body was shaking violently now. "He was right behind me." The cowboy's eyes scanned the dark forest beyond the firelight, and his hand moved to rest on the revolver at his hip. "You stay right here by this fire. Don't move." He pulled another blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her as well, layering warmth over her. Then he moved to his saddlebag and retrieved a tin cup and a small flask. He poured amber liquid into the cup and pressed it to her lips. "Drink this. All of it." The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good burn, something that reminded her she was alive. Olivia drank it in small sips while the cowboy built up the fire, adding logs until the flames roared and heat washed over her in waves. He draped her wet clothes over a line he strung between two trees, then retrieved what looked like spare clothing from his pack. "These will be too big, but they're dry," he said, handing her a shirt and pair of long underwear. "Can you change yourself, or do you need help?" "I can manage," Olivia said. Though her fingers felt like blocks of wood, she appreciated that he turned his back, giving her privacy as she struggled out of her remaining wet undergarments and into his dry clothes. The fabric smelled like leather and wood smoke and something indefinably masculine. The shirt hung nearly to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves up several times. The long underwear were comically large, but they were dry and warm, and that was all that mattered. "Decent," she said softly. He turned back and nodded with what might have been approval, then grabbed his bedroll and spread it out near the fire. "Sit here. Get as close to the fire as you can." While she settled onto the bedroll, he moved around the camp with quiet efficiency, checking on his horse, scanning the dark forest, returning to build up the fire even more. Finally, he settled down beside her, though he kept his revolver within easy reach. "I'm Yates Jameson," he said, extending his hand. "Olivia Greene." Her hand was still shaking when she placed it in his, but his grip was warm and steady. "Thank you for pulling me out. I thought I was going to die." "You almost did." His expression was serious. "That water's cold enough to stop your heart in minutes. You were lucky I was camped here." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "Why was that man chasing you?" "I don't know." Olivia pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "I work at the boarding house in town, doing laundry and changing linens. I noticed him watching me this afternoon, just standing across the street staring at the window. When I went to deliver clean linens to the saloon tonight, he followed me. He cornered me in the alley behind the building, said he wanted to talk to me, but the way he looked at me..." She shuddered, and it wasn't entirely from the cold. "I've seen that look before. So I ran." Yates's jaw tightened again, and something hard flickered in his eyes. "You did the right thing. A man who needs to corner a woman in an alley doesn't have good intentions." He stood up and walked to the edge of the firelight again, peering into the darkness. "I don't hear anything out there now. Maybe he gave up when you went through the ice, might have thought you drowned." "Maybe." Olivia didn't feel convinced. "Or maybe he's waiting. If he is, he'll have to go through me to get to you." Yates returned to the fire and settled back down, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You should try to warm up more. Hypothermia is dangerous even after you're out of the water." "How do you know so much about it?" "Lost a friend to it once, up in Montana." His voice went quiet. "We were driving cattle through a winter storm. He fell in a river much like you did, but there was no one close enough to pull him out in time. By the time we got to him, it was too late." He looked at her, and the firelight reflected in his eyes. So I know what to watch for. If you start feeling confused or sleepy, you tell me right away. Olivia nodded. Despite the layers of blankets and the roaring fire, she still felt cold deep in her bones, a chill that seemed to radiate from her core. Without thinking about it, she shifted closer to Yates, drawn to the solid warmth of him. He didn't move away. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her against his side. Body heat, he said, as if explaining himself. It's the fastest way to warm someone up. She should have felt uncomfortable being this close to a stranger wearing his clothes and pressed against his side, but instead Olivia felt safer than she had in hours. She let herself relax against him, let his warmth seep into her cold body. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the fire crackle and dance. "What brings you to these woods?" Olivia asked eventually. "Most cowboys I know stay in town when it's this cold." "I'm not most cowboys." A slight smile touched Yates's lips, the first she'd seen from him. "I've been tracking a horse thief who made off with some stock from a ranch about 20 miles south of here. Trail led me this direction, but I lost it when the snow started up again this afternoon. Made camp here figuring I'd pick it up again in the morning." "You track people for a living?" "Sometimes. I do whatever work needs doing. Trail boss, ranch hand, tracker, occasional deputy when a town needs an extra gun." He shifted slightly, adjusting his arm around her. "I go where the work is. Been that way since I was 18 and left my father's ranch in Nevada." "Why did you leave?" Yates was quiet for a long moment. "My father and I didn't see eye to eye on much. He wanted me to settle down, take over the ranch, marry the daughter of his business partner. I wanted to see what was over the next hill. So one morning I saddled my horse and rode out. And I've been riding ever since." "Do you ever regret it?" "Sometimes." His voice was thoughtful. "When the winter's cold and I'm sleeping on the ground, I think about what it might be like to have a warm house and a soft bed. But then the morning comes and I'm free to ride wherever I want, answer to no one, and I remember why I left." He looked down at her. "What about you? How does a young woman end up working in a boarding house in a mountain town like Eureka?" "I came here with my parents in '78, Olivia said. "My father heard there was still gold in these mountains if you knew where to look. He was a dreamer, always chasing the next fortune. My mother followed him because she loved him, even though it broke her heart to leave Ohio." She stared into the fire, watching the flames blur. "They both died of fever the winter after we arrived. I was 18, alone, with no money and no way to get back east. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house took me in, gave me work and a room. I've been there ever since." "That's a hard thing, losing your parents young." "It was." Olivia's throat tightened. "But I survived. I learned to take care of myself, learned to be careful about who to trust. This town can be rough, especially for a woman alone." "Most frontier towns are." Yates's arm tightened around her slightly. "You're still shaking. How do you feel? Tired?" "Cold, but better than before." She realized it was true. The violent shivering had subsided to occasional tremors, and she could feel her fingers and toes again, though they tingled painfully. "I think your whiskey and your fire saved my life." "You're not out of danger yet. We need to keep you warm through the night." He seemed to come to a decision. "I'm going to keep this fire going, and you're going to stay right here where it's warmest. If that man is still out there, he'll think twice about approaching a camp with a fire this big and an armed man sitting watch." "You're going to stay awake all night?" "I've done it before. Besides, I couldn't sleep knowing you might take a turn for the worse." His expression was serious. "You scared 10 years off my life when I saw you go through that ice. I pulled you out, so I'm responsible for making sure you stay alive now." "That's not how responsibility works." "It is to me." There was something final in his tone that told her arguing would be pointless. They fell into a comfortable silence again, and Olivia felt exhaustion pulling at her despite her efforts to stay alert. The cold had drained her more than she'd realized, and the warmth of the fire and Yates's solid presence beside her made her eyelids heavy. "Talk to me," Yates said suddenly. "Tell me something, anything. I need to know you're staying conscious." Olivia forced her eyes open wider. "What do you want to know? What do you do when you're not working? What makes Olivia Greene happy?" It was such an unexpected question that she had to think about it. "I like to read," she said finally. "Mrs. Patterson has a whole shelf of books that belonged to her late husband. I've read most of them twice, novels, poetry, even a book about ancient Rome. And I like to walk by the creek in the summer when the wildflowers are blooming." She paused. "I used to like that creek anyway. I don't think I'll feel the same about it after tonight." "That's understandable, but don't let one bad night ruin something you love. That creek didn't try to hurt you. It was just there, and you were unlucky." He shifted to add another log to the fire. "What else? You must have dreams, things you want to do." "I used to dream about leaving Eureka," Olivia admitted. "Going to San Francisco or Sacramento, somewhere bigger where there might be more opportunities. But I don't have the money for that. And the truth is, I'm afraid, I don't know anyone in those cities. At least here I have Mrs. Patterson and a few friends, a job that keeps me fed and housed. It's not much, but it's safe." "Safe isn't always living," Yates said quietly. "Sometimes safe is just surviving." His words struck something deep inside her. "Is that why you keep moving? Because staying still feels like just surviving?" "Maybe. Or maybe I haven't found a reason to stop yet." He looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were warm. "What would it take to make you feel like you were living instead of surviving?" Olivia considered the question. "I don't know. I think I'd like to have a home that's really mine, not just a room in someone else's house. I'd like to wake up in the morning and not worry about whether I'll have enough money to eat next week. And—" She hesitated, feeling heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I'd like to have someone who looks at me like I matter, like I'm worth more than just the work I can do." "You matter," Yates said, and his voice was so sincere that she looked up at him in surprise. "Any man with eyes can see that you're special. That fool chasing you tonight, he didn't see you as a person, just something he wanted to take, but you're brave, Olivia. You ran when you needed to, and you fought to stay alive in that water. Those are the actions of someone who knows her life has value." No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Olivia felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back. "Thank you for saying that. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true." He reached up with his free hand and added another log to the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the dark sky. "You should try to rest a little. I'll wake you every hour to make sure you're all right." "I don't think I can sleep." "Try anyway. Your body needs rest to recover." Olivia let her head rest against his shoulder and closed her eyes. She didn't expect to actually fall asleep, but the warmth and exhaustion combined to pull her under within minutes. True to his word, Yates woke her what felt like moments later, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Olivia, open your eyes for me." She blinked up at him groggily. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just need to see that you're all right." He studied her face carefully. "How do you feel? Any confusion, numbness?" "I'm warm, tired," she yawned. "Can I sleep more?" "Yes, just wanted to check." He settled her back against his shoulder. Sleep. This pattern repeated several times through the long night. Each time Olivia woke, the fire was still blazing, and Yates was still keeping watch. Once she woke to find him standing at the edge of the clearing with his gun drawn, staring into the forest. But whatever he'd heard didn't materialize, and he eventually returned to the fire. When she woke for what felt like the 10th time, pale gray light was filtering through the trees. Dawn was breaking. Yates was still beside her, though he looked tired now, his eyes shadowed. "Morning, Yimri," he said when he noticed she was awake. "How do you feel?" Olivia took stock of herself. She was still tired and her muscles ached, but the bone-deep cold was gone. "Better. Much better." She sat up slowly, the blankets falling away. You stayed awake all night?" "I said I would." He stood and stretched, his back popping audibly. "Your clothes should be dry by now. I kept them close to the fire." She stood as well, slightly unsteady on her feet, and Yates was there immediately with a hand on her elbows. "Easy. You're still recovering." "I'm fine." But she was grateful for his support as she made her way to where her dress hung on the line. The fabric was dry and stiff from the heat, but it was clean and whole. She took it and retreated behind his horse to change, appreciating his tact as he busied himself with kicking dirt over the fire. When she emerged, dressed in her own clothes again, Yates was saddling his horse. "I'm taking you back to town," he said. "You need proper rest and hot food, and I want to talk to the sheriff about this man who was chasing you." "I don't even know what he looks like, not really," Olivia protested. "It was dark, and I was so scared I didn't get a good look at his face." "But you'd recognize him if you saw him again, wouldn't you?" She thought about the man's cold eyes, the way he'd smiled when he'd cornered her. "Yes, I'd recognize him." "Then we're talking to the sheriff." Yates finished with the saddle and turned to her. "Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I can ride." He nodded and swung up into the saddle, then extended his hand to her. Olivia grasped it, and he pulled her up behind him with easy strength. She settled onto the horse's rump and wrapped her arms around Yates's waist, very aware of how solid he felt, how steady. The ride back to Eureka took less time than her frantic flight through the forest had. In the growing daylight, Olivia could see the path she'd taken, the broken branches and disturbed snow marking her desperate run. When they emerged from the trees, the town was spread out below them, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the main street, smoke rising from chimneys into the cold morning air. Yates guided his horse down the slope and into town. A few early risers were already out, and Olivia was acutely aware of the stares they were drawing. A woman riding behind a strange man, both of them dressed for hard travel, was bound to cause talk. She caught sight of Mrs. Patterson sweeping the steps of the boarding house, and the older woman's eyes went wide. "Olivia Greene, where have you been? I've been worried sick." "Mrs." Patterson hurried down the steps as Yates brought his horse to a halt. "When you didn't come back last night, I thought something terrible had happened." Something terrible almost did. Yates dismounted and helped Olivia down. "Is there a sheriff in this town?" "Sheriff Morrison, but he's usually at the jail this time of morning." Mrs. Patterson looked between them, her expression shifting from worry to curiosity. "What's this about?" "A man chased Olivia into the forest last night," Yates said bluntly. "She fell through the ice on the creek trying to get away from him. I pulled her out and kept her warm through the night, but we need to report this." Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her mouth. "Through the ice? Oh, my dear girl." She reached for Olivia, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You could have died." "I would have if not for Mr. Jameson." Olivia returned the hug, feeling the older woman's genuine concern wash over her. Mrs. Patterson had been more of a mother to her than an employer these past years. "Then I owe you a debt, Mr. Jameson," Mrs. Patterson said, releasing Olivia and turning to Yates. "Thank you for saving her." "I did what anyone would do." But Yates's eyes were on Olivia, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip. "Now where's this sheriff's office?" The jail was 3 buildings down, a squat structure with barred windows. Sheriff Morrison was indeed inside, a graying man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He listened to their story with increasing concern, his expression growing darker when Olivia described the man who'd chased her. "Tall fellow, dark coat, scar on his left cheek?" the sheriff asked. Olivia thought back to the brief glimpse she'd had of her pursuer. "I don't remember a scar, but it was dark. He could have had one." "Could be Jack Brennan," Morrison said, leaning back in his chair. "He's been causing trouble up and down this valley for months. Started in Redding, from what I hear. Follows women, scares them, sometimes worse than scares them. If he's moved his operations to Eureka, we've got a problem." "Why hasn't anyone stopped him?" Yates's voice was hard. "He's careful. Never leaves enough evidence, and his victims are usually too scared to testify. But if this was him and he chased Miss Greene, that's assault. Morrison stood. I'll put the word out. Increase patrols. Miss Greene, I'll need you to stay in town. Stay somewhere safe. If you see this man again, you come straight to me. She's staying at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson said firmly, and I'll make sure she's not alone. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Patterson. The sheriff turned to Yates. You planning on staying in town, son? For a few days at least. Yates glanced at Olivia. I want to make sure this situation is resolved before I move on. Something in Olivia's chest tightened at the reminder that he would be moving on. Of course he would. He'd said himself that he never stayed anywhere long. But the thought of him leaving filled her with an unexpected sadness. They left the sheriff's office and Mrs. Patterson immediately began fussing over Olivia. You need hot food and rest. Come on, dear, let's get you settled. She paused and looked at Yates. Mr. Jameson, we have rooms available if you need a place to stay. I insist you take one, at least for tonight. It's the least I can do after what you did for Olivia. Yates hesitated, clearly weighing the offer. His eyes met Olivia's, and something passed between them. I appreciate that, madam. I accept. The boarding house was warm and smelled of coffee and bacon, and Olivia felt herself relax as they stepped inside. Mrs. Patterson's establishment was always clean and welcoming, a refuge from the harsh world outside. The older woman showed Yates to a room on the second floor, then shooed Olivia upstairs to her own small room. You rest, Mrs. Patterson ordered. I'll bring you up some breakfast in a bit, and tonight we'll have a proper meal, and you can tell me the whole story. Olivia was too tired to argue. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, shed her boots and coat, and collapsed onto her bed fully clothed. She was asleep within seconds. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky and someone was knocking softly on her door. Olivia, it's Mrs. Patterson. I have food. Olivia sat up, momentarily disoriented. Her body ached in new places, reminders of her ordeal in the frozen creek. Come in. Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a tray laden with bread, butter, cold roast beef, and a steaming mug of coffee. I let you sleep as long as I could, but you need to eat something. She set the tray on the small table by the window. How are you feeling? Like I fell through ice and nearly drowned. But Olivia managed to smile as she moved to the table and began to eat. The food was simple but delicious, and she realized she was ravenous. Mrs. Patterson settled into the room's only chair, her hands folded in her lap. That Mr. Jameson came by to check on you around noon. I told him you were sleeping, and he seemed satisfied with that. He's a good man, Olivia. He saved my life. He did more than that. He stayed with you all night, kept you warm and safe. That's not something just any man would do. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were shrewd. He's handsome too in that rough cowboy way, and he can't seem to stop looking at you. Mrs. Patterson, Olivia said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. He's just being kind. Kindness is one thing. The way that man looks at you is something else entirely. The older woman stood. I'm just saying, dear, don't dismiss it out of hand. Good men are rare in this world, and ones who'll jump into freezing water to save you are even rarer. After Mrs. Patterson left, Olivia finished her meal and changed into a clean dress. She brushed out her hair, which was a tangled mess from the creek water, and pinned it up neatly. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above her dresser, she saw someone who looked surprisingly normal, considering she'd nearly died less than 24 hours ago. She found Yates in the boarding house's small parlor, sitting near the window with a book in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and his expression softened. You look better. How do you feel? Sore, but alive. She sat in the chair across from him. I never properly thanked you. You saved my life last night, and then you stayed awake all night to make sure I was all right. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You don't owe me anything. Yates closed the book and set it aside. I'm just glad I was there. But you were there. That's what matters. Olivia leaned forward. Mrs. Patterson said you came by to check on me. I wanted to make sure you were all right. You went through something terrible. His eyes searched her face. Are you all right? Really? It was such a simple question, but asked with such genuine concern that Olivia felt something crack open inside her chest. I will be. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there. If I'd drowned in that creek, who would have even known what happened to me? Mrs. Patterson would have thought I'd run off, and that would have been the end of it. But that didn't happen. You're here, you're safe. Because of you. She held his gaze. You're a good man, Yates Jameson. I'm just a drifter who happened to be in the right place. But there was something in his eyes that told her he was pleased by her words. They talked for hours that afternoon, sitting in the quiet parlor while Mrs. Patterson's other boarders came and went. Yates told her stories about his travels, about the places he'd seen and the work he'd done. He spoke of Montana winters and Arizona summers, of cattle drives and mining camps and small towns that barely qualified as towns at all. Olivia found herself captivated by his stories, by the life of freedom and adventure he'd chosen. In turn, she told him about her life in Eureka, about the boarding house residents she'd come to know, about the small joys she found in her daily routine. She told him about the books she loved and the dreams she'd mostly given up on, and he listened with a focus that made her feel like every word mattered. As evening fell, Mrs. Patterson called them to dinner. There were 4 other boarders at the long table, 2 miners, a school teacher, and a traveling salesman. All of them had heard about Olivia's ordeal by now, and they peppered Yates with questions about the rescue. He answered briefly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, and Olivia appreciated that he didn't embellish or turn it into a dramatic tale. After dinner, Yates excused himself to check on his horse at the livery, and Olivia helped Mrs. Patterson clear the dishes. He's smitten with you, Mrs. Patterson said as soon as they were alone in the kitchen. That man is absolutely smitten. You don't know that. I've been alive 58 years, my girl. I know the look of a man falling in love. Mrs. Patterson handed her a dish to dry. The question is, how do you feel about him? Olivia carefully dried the dish, considering her answer. I barely know him. We've known each other less than a day. Sometimes a day is enough. I knew I was going to marry Mr. Patterson within an hour of meeting him. The older woman's expression softened with memory. He was staying at my father's hotel in Sacramento, and I brought him his breakfast. He looked at me like I was the sunrise, and I was lost. We were married 3 weeks later, and I had 32 good years with that man before the fever took him. That's different. You had time together. We made time together. That's what matters. Mrs. Patterson turned to face her fully. Olivia, you've been surviving in this town for 4 years. You're a good girl, a hard worker, and you never complain. But I've watched the light dim in your eyes year by year. Then this cowboy rides in and pulls you out of a frozen creek, and suddenly you're glowing like you used to when you first arrived. Don't throw that away because you're afraid. I'm not afraid, Olivia protested, but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She was terrified. Terrified of hoping for something more, terrified of letting herself care about a man who would be gone as soon as his business was finished. He's leaving, Mrs. Patterson. He said himself he never stays anywhere long. Then maybe you give him a reason to stay, or maybe you go with him. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. Just promise me you'll think about it. Promise me you won't let fear make your decisions for you. Olivia promised, though she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. When Yates returned from the livery, she was sitting on the front porch despite the cold, wrapped in a heavy shawl and watching the stars. He climbed the steps and settled onto the bench beside her. You should be inside where it's warm, he said. I needed some air. I've been inside all day. She looked at him. Is your horse all right? He's fine. Well fed and brushed down. The livery owner's a good man. Yates stretched out his long legs. I talked to Sheriff Morrison again. He's got deputies watching the roads out of town, checking everyone who comes or goes. If this Brennan fellow is still here, they'll find him. And if he's already gone, Then you're safe, at least for now. Yates was quiet for a moment. I'm not leaving until Morrison gives the all clear. I want to know you're protected. You don't have to do that. You have your own life, your own work. The horse thief can wait. This is more important. He turned to look at her, and in the light spilling from the boarding house windows, his eyes were serious. You're more important. Olivia's breath caught. Yates. I know we just met. I know this is fast, but last night, when I pulled you out of that water and you weren't breathing right, when I thought you might die in my arms. He stopped, his jaw working. It scared me more than anything has scared me in years. And I've been thinking about why that is, and I keep coming back to the same answer. What answer? Her voice was barely a whisper. That some people come into your life like lightning, and they change everything in an instant. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused. You're lightning, Olivia Greene. She should pull her hand back. She should thank him politely and go inside. She should protect herself from the inevitable hurt when he rode away. But instead, she laced her fingers through his and held on. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone rough, maybe, or careless. Cowboys have a reputation. She smiled slightly. But you're gentle, kind. You read books and know about hypothermia and stay up all night to watch over someone you barely know. My mother taught me to read before I was 5. She said education was the one thing no one could take from you. Yates's thumb stroked over her knuckles, and watching over you wasn't a burden. It was an honor. They sat in the cold, hands linked, and talked until the stars wheeled overhead. Yates told her about his mother, who died when he was 15, and how her death had changed his father into someone hard and distant. Olivia told him about the dreams she'd had as a girl in Ohio, about wanting to see the ocean and visit San Francisco and maybe even go back east to New York. Why don't you? Yates asked. What's stopping you? Money? Fear? The unknown? She shrugged. All the usual things that stop people from chasing dreams. Those are just excuses. Maybe, but they're real excuses. I could take you to San Francisco, Yates said suddenly. It's only a few days' ride if we push. I know people there, places to stay. You could see the ocean. Olivia's heart began to race. You don't mean that. I do. Why shouldn't I? You said yourself you want to see it. I've been there a dozen times. We could go together. I have responsibilities here. My job, Mrs. Patterson. Would understand. She wants you to be happy, Olivia. Anyone can see that. Yates squeezed her hand. But I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm just saying the door is open if you want to walk through it. Before Olivia could respond, the door to the boarding house opened and Mrs. Patterson stuck her head out. It's nearly 10 o'clock, and it's freezing out here. Both of you inside. Now. They obeyed, separating reluctantly as they climbed the stairs to their respective rooms. But as Olivia lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Yates's offer, San Francisco, the ocean, adventure. With him? It was impossible, of course. She couldn't just leave her life on a whim, could she? The next morning dawned gray and cold, with fresh snow falling. Olivia woke early and dressed quickly, then headed downstairs to help Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast for the boarders. But when she entered the kitchen, she found Yates already there, sitting at the small table with a cup of coffee and talking quietly with the older woman. There she is, Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing smile. Mr. Jameson was just telling me about his travels. Quite the adventurous life you lead, sir. It has its moments. Yates stood as Olivia entered. How did you sleep? Better than I expected. She poured herself coffee and joined them at the table. Any word from the sheriff? I'm heading over there after breakfast. Thought I'd check in, see if they've had any luck finding Brennan. He paused. I was hoping you might come with me. I should help Mrs. Patterson with breakfast. Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. I can handle breakfast just fine. You go with Mr. Jameson. It'll be good for you to get out, and I'll feel better knowing you're with someone who can protect you. So after a quick breakfast of oatmeal and toast, Olivia bundled up in her coat and walked with Yates through the snowy streets to the sheriff's office. The town was quiet this early, most people still inside where it was warm. Their breath plumed in the cold air, and Olivia was grateful for Yates's solid presence beside her. Sheriff Morrison had news. "Found him," he said as soon as they entered. "Jack Brennan was holed up in a shack about 2 miles outside town. We brought him in this morning. He's in the cell right now." "Can I see him?" Olivia asked. "I need to know if he's the one who chased me." Morrison led them to the cells in the back. A man sat on the narrow cot, his face sullen and angry. He was tall and lean with dark hair and cold blue eyes. When he saw Olivia, those eyes narrowed, and she knew. "That's him," she said, stepping back instinctively. Yates was there immediately, his hand on her back, steadying her. "You're sure?" Morrison asked. "I'm sure. Those eyes. I'll never forget them." Brennan stood and walked to the bars. "I don't know what you're talking about, girl. I never saw you before in my life." "You chased her into the forest 2 nights ago," Yates said, his voice hard. "She nearly died because of you." "Can't prove nothing," Brennan sneered. "It's her word against mine." "It's her word and mine," Yates corrected. "I saw you in those woods. I heard you chasing her. That's 2 witnesses." That was a stretch of the truth, since Yates had only heard the commotion, but Brennan didn't need to know that. The man's confidence wavered. "We're also charging you with the assault on Mary Chen 3 weeks ago in Reading," Morrison added, "and the harassment of Eliza Foster in Dunsmuir last month. Both women have agreed to testify against you. You're going to be locked up for a long time, Brennan." The man's face went pale, then red with fury. He lunged at the bars, and Olivia jumped back, her heart racing. But the bars held, and Yates moved between her and the cell, his body a protective shield. "Get her out of here, Maria," Morrison said. "You've made your identification. That's all we need." They left quickly, Olivia's hands shaking. Once they were outside in the cold air, she stopped and took a deep breath. "He's locked up. He can't hurt me now." "He never will again." Yates's hand found hers. "You're safe, Olivia." The relief that flooded through her was so strong it made her dizzy. She'd been holding tension she didn't even realize was there, and now it was draining away, leaving her weak. Yates caught her when her knees buckled, supporting her weight easily. "I've got you. You're all right." "I know." She leaned against him for a moment, letting herself take comfort in his strength. I didn't realize how scared I still was until I saw him locked up." "That's normal. You've been through a trauma." He held her gently. "But it's over now. He's going to prison and you're free." Free. The word resonated through her. She was free. Free from fear, free from looking over her shoulder, and with that freedom came possibility. She pulled back and looked up at Yates. "That offer you made last night about San Francisco, did you mean it?" His eyes widened slightly. "Every word." "Then I want to go. I want to see the ocean." She took a breath. "I want to go with you." The smile that spread across Yates's face was like sunrise. "You're sure?" "I'm terrified, but yes, I'm sure." She laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "I've been surviving for 4 years. I want to try living." He swept her up in a hug, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, they were both laughing, and Olivia felt lighter than she had in years. Mrs. Patterson was predictably delighted when they told her. "I knew it. I knew you two were meant for something special." She pulled Olivia into a fierce hug. "You go, my dear. See the ocean. Have adventures. Live the life you're meant to live." "Are you sure you'll be all right without me?" Olivia felt guilty for leaving the woman who'd been so good to her. "I've been running this boarding house for 20 years. I think I can manage without you for a while." Mrs. Patterson held her at arm's length, her eyes misty. "But I want letters. You write to me and tell me everything, you hear? I promise." It took 2 days to make preparations. Yates arranged for supplies and a second horse, a gentle mare that Olivia could ride comfortably. Mrs. Patterson packed food and insisted on giving Olivia her warmest coat, a heavy wool garment that had belonged to her late husband. The other boarders heard about the journey and contributed what they could. The miners gave them a map marking good camping spots, the school teacher donated a book of poetry, and the salesman provided a small tent. On the morning they were to leave, Olivia stood in her little room at the boarding house and looked around. 4 years of her life had been lived within these walls. 4 years of safety and routine and quiet survival. Now she was leaving it all behind for something wild and uncertain. She wasn't scared anymore. She was excited. Yates was waiting downstairs with the horses when she came down, her few possessions packed in a borrowed saddlebag. Mrs. Patterson hugged her one last time, crying openly now. "You take care of her," she told Yates fiercely. "She's precious." "I know, and I will. You have my word." They mounted their horses, and Olivia took one last look at the boarding house, at the town that had been her home. Then she turned her horse toward the road leading west, toward the mountains and beyond them, the sea. "Ready?" Yates asked. "Ready?" They rode out of Eureka as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. It felt like a blessing, like the world itself was celebrating her decision to finally live instead of just survive. The journey to San Francisco took 5 days. They traveled steadily but not desperately, stopping to camp each night in sheltered spots Yates knew from his travels. The first night, Olivia was nervous about sharing a camp with him, but Yates was unfailingly respectful, giving her privacy to change and settling his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. But as the nights passed and they talked for hours by the firelight, that distance began to feel wrong. On the third night, Olivia moved her bedroll closer to his, and he didn't protest. On the fourth night, she woke from a nightmare about the frozen creek and found him there immediately, soothing her with quiet words until she fell back asleep. They talked about everything during those days, their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Yates told her about the loneliness of always moving, always being the stranger in town. Olivia told him about the loneliness of staying in one place but never truly belonging. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms, both hated oysters, and both dreamed of seeing the Grand Canyon someday. "We could go there," Yates said one evening as they sat by the fire, "after San Francisco. The Grand Canyon is only a few weeks' ride from here if we take the southern route." "You make it sound so easy." "It is easy. You just point your horse in a direction and go." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "I've been alone for 8 years, Olivia. I thought that was what I wanted, thought freedom meant being alone. But now I think maybe I was just waiting." "For what?" "For you. For someone who makes all this beauty mean something because I have someone to share it with." His thumb stroked over her palm. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I pulled you out of that creek and you looked at me like I was a hero instead of just a drifter passing through." Olivia's heart was hammering. "Yates." "You don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know, because when we get to San Francisco, you're going to have options. You could stay there, make a life in the city like you always dreamed, and if that's what you want, I'll support it. But I'm hoping—" He paused. "I'm hoping you'll choose to keep riding with me. Not just to San Francisco, but everywhere after that." She leaned across the fire, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm falling in love with you, too. I think I started falling when you wrapped me in blankets and promised to keep me safe all night. When you looked at me like I mattered more than anything else in the world." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So is that a yes?" Yates asked. "You'll keep riding with me?" "That's a yes, but Yates—" She bit her lip. "Eventually, don't you think we might want to stop? Settle down somewhere?" "Maybe, probably." He pulled her close, arranging them so she was leaning back against his chest. "But not yet. Let's see the world first. Let's have adventures and collect stories. And when we're ready to put down roots, we'll find the perfect place and build something together. How does that sound?" Like everything I never knew I wanted. They reached San Francisco on a gray afternoon, the city sprawling across hills that rolled down to a vast expanse of water. Olivia had never seen anything like it. The buildings seemed to go on forever, and the bay was dotted with ships of every size. The air smelled of salt and fish and coal smoke, completely different from the pine-scented mountain air of Eureka. Yates led them to a modest hotel near the waterfront that he knew from previous visits. They took 2 rooms, still maintaining propriety even though Olivia increasingly wished they didn't have to. After settling the horses in their gear, Yates took her hand. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her through the city streets, past buildings taller than anything in Eureka, past shops displaying goods from around the world, past crowds of people speaking a dozen different languages. Olivia tried to take it all in, overwhelmed by the noise and bustle and sheer scale of everything. Then they crested a hill, and there it was, the ocean. Olivia stopped dead, her breath caught in her throat. It stretched out forever, gray and green and churning with waves. It was bigger than she'd imagined, wilder, more beautiful. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, Yates." "Come on. You can't see the ocean from a distance. You have to feel it." He tugged her down the hill toward the beach, and soon they were walking on sand, the wind whipping Olivia's hair loose from its pins. Yates led her right to the water's edge, where waves rushed up and soaked their boots. Olivia didn't care. She was laughing, crying, overwhelmed by the immensity and power of it all. She turned to Yates, and he was watching her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. "Thank you," she said, throwing her arms around him. "Thank you for bringing me here." "Thank you for coming with me." He held her tight. "I've seen the ocean 100 times, but I never really saw it until I saw it through your eyes." They spent 3 days in San Francisco. Yates showed her everything. The wharves where ships from China and the Sandwich Islands unloaded exotic cargo, the markets where you could buy anything imaginable, the hills with their beautiful painted houses, and most importantly, the ocean. They returned to the beach every day, and each time Olivia felt the same wonder. On their last evening in the city, Yates took her to dinner at a restaurant with white tablecloths and candles. It was fancier than anywhere Olivia had ever eaten, and she felt out of place in her simple dress. But Yates looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the room, and that made all the difference. Over roasted duck and wine, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking about what you said, about eventually settling down. You don't have to worry about that now. I'm happy just riding with you." "I know. But I want you to know that when we do settle down, it's going to be as my wife, if you'll have me." Olivia's breath stopped. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet. Not officially." Yates's thumb stroked over her knuckles. "But I'm telling you my intentions. When we find the right place, when we're ready to stop riding, I'm going to ask you properly. And I'm hoping you'll say yes." "I will," Olivia said without hesitation. "Whenever you ask, wherever we are, the answer will be yes." His smile could have lit the whole city. "Then we're engaged to be engaged. That's not a real thing. It is now." They left San Francisco heading south, following the coast. True to his word about showing her the world, Yates took them to places Olivia had never dreamed of seeing. They visited the missions with their ancient bells and flowering courtyards. They rode through valleys where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. They camped beside rivers and in meadows, and once memorably in a grove of trees so tall that Olivia had to crane her neck back until it hurt to see their tops. Everywhere they went, Yates found work. He was a skilled horseman and an excellent hand with cattle, and his reputation began to spread. Ranch owners heard he was passing through and sought him out, offering good money for temporary work. Olivia found work too, cooking for ranch hands or helping with laundry, or sometimes, when they stopped in a town for more than a few days, doing seamstress work. They were building a life together, one day at a time, and somewhere along the way the question stopped being whether they would settle down and became where. They found their answer in the spring of 1885, nearly a year after they'd left Eureka together. They were riding through the Salinas Valley, and Yates heard about a small ranch that was for sale. The owner had died, and his widow was moving east to live with her daughter. The ranch was modest, 100 acres with a creek running through it, a sturdy house, a barn, and a few outbuildings. The herd had been sold off, but the land was good. "Let's at least look at it," Yates said. The moment they rode onto the property, Olivia knew. The house was small but well built, with a porch that faced west toward the mountains. The barn was sound, and the creek sang as it tumbled over rocks. There were oak trees for shade and good grazing land and a view that stretched for miles. "This is it," she said. "This is home." Yates looked at the land, at the house, and then at her. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They bought the ranch with the money they'd saved from a year of working their way down the coast. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And as they stood on the porch of their new home, Yates pulled a ring from his pocket. It was simple silver with a small stone. "I've been carrying this for 3 months, waiting for the right moment." He took her hand. "Olivia Greene, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on this land and let me love you for the rest of my days?" "Yes," Olivia said through happy tears. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in Salinas the following week, in a small church with just a handful of witnesses. Olivia wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric they'd bought especially for the occasion, and Yates wore his best shirt and a new vest. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. That night, in the small house that was now theirs, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Olivia had been nervous, but Yates was gentle and patient, and by the time they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. They spent the next months making the ranch truly theirs. They repaired the barn and fixed the fences. They bought a small herd of cattle and some chickens. Yates built a bigger chicken coop and a smokehouse, and Olivia planted a garden. They worked from dawn to dusk, and every night they fell into bed exhausted but happy. Mrs. Patterson visited that fall, making the long trip from Eureka to see them. She cried when she saw how happy Olivia was, how the ranch was thriving, how Yates looked at his wife like she hung the moon. "I knew you two were meant for each other," she said, hugging them both fiercely. "I'm so glad you both found the courage to take a chance." "I found the courage because you told me to," Olivia reminded her. "You told me not to let fear make my decisions." "And look what happened when you listened," Mrs. Patterson beamed. "You're glowing, dear, absolutely glowing." There was a reason for that glow, though Olivia hadn't told anyone yet except Yates. She was pregnant. The baby would come in the spring, nearly 2 years after that night when she'd fallen through the ice, and Yates had pulled her out. When she finally told Mrs. Patterson, the older woman wept with joy. "A baby! Oh, my dear girl, I'm so happy for you both." The pregnancy was easy, and Olivia bloomed with health. Yates was almost comically protective, insisting she rest and refusing to let her do any heavy work. She humored him because she could see how excited he was, how he would sometimes place his hand on her growing belly and get a look of wonder on his face. "I can't believe we're going to be parents," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "A year and a half ago I was alone, drifting from place to place. Now I have a wife, a ranch, and soon a baby. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky." Olivia leaned against him. "That night in the forest when everything seemed so dark and scary, I never could have imagined it would lead to this." "The best things in life come from the scariest moments, Mitri," Yates said, kissing the top of her head. "You just have to be brave enough to see them through." Their son was born in April of 1886, a healthy baby with a lusty cry and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas after Yates's father, a gesture of reconciliation since Yates had recently received a letter from his father expressing regret over their estrangement. Holding his son for the first time, Yates cried, "He's perfect! You're perfect! I don't deserve this!" "You deserve everything," Olivia told him, exhausted but happy beyond measure. Thomas was an easy baby, and Olivia discovered she loved being a mother. Watching Yates with their son was even better, seeing this tough cowboy reduced to silly voices and gentle touches. The ranch thrived, and they added more cattle, more land. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Pete who reminded Olivia a little of Yates when he was younger, all restless energy and dreams of adventure. When Thomas was 2, Olivia became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Olivia's mother. Sarah was quieter than Thomas had been, with her mother's green eyes and a calm disposition that balanced her brother's energy. The years passed in a blur of work and joy. Thomas grew tall and learned to ride before he could properly walk. Sarah developed a love of books and would sit for hours looking at the pictures in the volumes Olivia had slowly collected. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a proper parlor. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the valley for the quality of its cattle. Yates's father visited when Thomas was 5, an old man now bent with age, but with eyes that lit up when he saw his grandchildren. He and Yates talked long into the night, healing old wounds and finding peace. When he left a week later, he told Yates he was proud of him, and Yates cried again. "I never thought I'd hear him say that," he told Olivia that night. "I thought we were too broken to fix." "Nothing's too broken if both sides want to mend it," Olivia said wisely. "You taught me that when you pulled me out of that frozen creek. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to reach out and hold on." Mrs. Patterson visited every year, watching the children grow and the ranch flourish. She became like a grandmother to Thomas and Sarah, telling them stories and teaching them things their parents didn't know. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1892, Olivia grieved deeply for the woman who had been more mother to her than employer. But life continued, as it always does. Thomas grew into a fine young man, responsible and hard-working, with dreams of eventually taking over the ranch. Sarah developed a talent for music and convinced her parents to buy a piano, which she played beautifully. They grew and changed, but the ranch remained constant, a solid foundation for the family Yates and Olivia had built. On a cool evening in the fall of 1899, Yates and Olivia sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had countless times before. Their hair was touched with gray now, and their hands bore the calluses of 15 years of hard work. Thomas was out checking the herd, and Sarah was inside practicing her piano. The familiar melody drifted out through the open windows. "Do you ever think about that night?" Olivia asked suddenly. "The night we met. I think about it all the time." Yates took her hand, his fingers automatically finding their familiar place laced through hers. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you. If I'd camped somewhere else, if I'd been asleep when you ran past, if I'd been even a minute slower getting to the creek. But you didn't, and you weren't." Olivia squeezed his hand. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there, and you saved me in more ways than just pulling me out of that water." "We saved each other." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You gave me a reason to stop running. You showed me that home isn't a place that traps you. It's a place where you're free to be yourself. And you showed me that surviving isn't the same as living." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "You taught me to be brave, to take chances, to trust that good things can come from scary moments." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear Thomas whistling as he rode back toward the barn. Sarah's piano music shifted to a new song, something bright and joyful. "We did good, didn't we?" Yates said softly. "With all of this, the ranch, the kids, us." "We did better than good. We built something beautiful." Olivia turned her face up to his. "And it all started because I fell into a frozen creek and a cowboy pulled me out." "Best mistake you ever made, falling into that creek." "It wasn't a mistake. It was fate." She kissed him, still feeling the same spark she'd felt that first night by his campfire. Everything that happened, all the fear and cold and danger, it was all worth it to get here, to have this life with you. I love you, Olivia Jameson. I love you too, Yates, always and forever. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, they remained on the porch, holding hands and watching their world. The ranch was quiet except for the sounds of home. Thomas unsaddling his horse, Sarah finishing her song, the cattle settling for the night, the creek singing its endless song. It was a good life, Olivia thought, a life worth fighting for, worth the fear and the risk and the leap into the unknown. She'd started as a frightened girl running through the dark, and she'd become a woman who knew her own strength, who'd built a home and raised a family and loved a good man with her whole heart. All because one cold winter night, a cowboy had been camping by a creek at exactly the right moment, all because he'd been brave enough to dive into freezing water to save a stranger, all because they'd both been brave enough to see where that moment might lead. The years continued to pass gently for the Jameson family. In 1901, Thomas married a sweet girl named Rebecca from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the eastern edge of the property. A year later, they gave Yates and Olivia their first grandchild, a boy they named Yates Jr. Holding his namesake, Yates cried for what Olivia teased must have been the 100th time in their marriage. Sarah eventually married a music teacher from Salinas, a kind man named David who thought her talent was extraordinary. They moved to San Francisco, where Sarah gave piano lessons to the children of wealthy families and occasionally performed in concerts. Olivia thought of her own first trip to San Francisco with Yates, how the city had seemed so overwhelming and magical. Now her daughter lived there, thriving in ways Olivia never could have imagined. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management. He had his father's eye for good cattle and his mother's head for business. Pete, who'd started as their hired hand, had become like family, eventually marrying and building his own small house on the far side of the property. The Jameson Ranch became known as a place where people were treated fairly, where hard work was rewarded, and where family came first. Yates and Olivia grew old together gracefully. Their hair turned from gray to white, and their steps became slower, but their love never diminished. Every evening, weather permitting, they sat on their porch and watched the sunset, holding hands and talking about their day or their children, or simply sitting in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Olivia with a trip back to Eureka. They made the journey slowly, taking their time and stopping at places they'd camped on that first trip down the coast. Eureka had grown in the years since they'd left, but the boarding house still stood, though it was under new ownership. They visited the cemetery and laid flowers on Mrs. Patterson's grave, both of them crying as they thanked her silently for her wisdom and kindness. They even rode out to the creek where they'd met. It was summer now, and the water burbled peacefully over the rocks, nothing like the frozen trap it had been that winter night. Olivia stood on the bank and looked at the place that had nearly been her grave and instead had become the birthplace of her new life. "Strange how things work out," she said. "If I'd run in any other direction, if you'd camped anywhere else." "Then we would have found each other some other way," Yates said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Olivia. We're one of those things." In 1904, on a warm May afternoon, Yates died in his sleep. He'd been working in the barn that morning, seemingly healthy and happy, had come in for lunch and told Olivia he was going to rest for a bit. When she came to wake him an hour later, he was gone, a peaceful expression on his face. Olivia's grief was profound, but she found comfort in knowing he'd died as he'd lived in his later years, surrounded by family, on the land he loved, at peace with the world. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree where he'd like to sit and watch the sunset. At the funeral, Olivia stood surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and friends, and spoke of the man who'd saved her life in more ways than one. She told the story of the frozen creek, of the cowboy who'd pulled her out and warmed her not just with blankets and fire, but with kindness and love. She talked about their adventures, their struggles, and the beautiful life they'd built together. "He taught me to be brave," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "And he taught me that home isn't a trap, it's a foundation. That love is worth the risk. That the best life is one lived fully, with someone who sees the best in you and brings it out." She looked at her children. "And now I see him in all of you, in Thomas's dedication to this land, in Sarah's joy in her music, in every grandchild's laugh. Yates isn't gone. He's here in every good thing we do, every kind word we speak, every moment we choose love over fear." Olivia lived for 6 more years after Yates died, remaining active and sharp almost to the end. She watched her grandchildren grow and welcomed 3 great-grandchildren. She continued to sit on the porch every evening, though now she sat alone, talking to Yates as if he were still beside her. Those who heard her said she seemed to find comfort in those one-sided conversations, and no one had the heart to discourage her. In the spring of 1910, at the age of 48, Olivia fell ill with pneumonia. She declined rapidly, and the family gathered around her bedside. On what would be her last day, with Thomas holding one hand and Sarah holding the other, Olivia smiled. "I'm not afraid," she told them. "I'm going to see your father again. We have so much to tell each other." As the sun set on that final day, Olivia closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully. Her last word was Yates, spoken with such love and joy that everyone in the room knew she'd seen him waiting for her. They buried her beside Yates under the oak tree, and on her headstone they carved, "She lived bravely and loved completely." And below that, "Together again." The ranch remained in the family for generations. Thomas and his descendants kept it going, honoring the legacy of hard work and kindness that Yates and Olivia had established. The story of how the ranch began, of the frozen creek and the cowboy and the frightened young woman, became family legend, passed down from parents to children to grandchildren. On certain evenings when the light is just right and the wind carries the scent of oak and grass, visitors to the ranch swear they can see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset. The family smiles when they hear these stories and doesn't correct them. Some loves are too strong for even death to separate, they say. Some bonds are eternal. And on the bank of the creek that runs through the property, someone long ago placed a simple marker, weathered now by time. Here love began in the cold. Here 2 souls found their way home. The ranch still stands, a testament to what can grow from a single moment of bravery, a single act of kindness. The creek still sings its endless song, remembering the night it nearly took a life, and instead gave birth to a love story that would echo through generations. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Yates and Olivia danced together in the eternal sunset, grateful for every moment, every choice, every scary leap of faith that led them to each other and to the beautiful life they built together. It all began with a frozen creek, a desperate run, and a cowboy who was in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. It began with fear and ended with love, and in between was a life lived fully, bravely, and without regret. And that, in the end, is all anyone can hope for: to love and be loved, to build something lasting, and to leave the world better than you found it. The Jameson family did all that and more. Their story became part of the fabric of the Salinas Valley, woven into the land itself. And every time someone hears the tale of how it began, they're reminded that the best things in life often come from the scariest moments, that courage is rewarded, and that true love really can last forever. The creek flows on, the ranch endures, and the love story of Yates and Olivia Jameson lives on in every sunset watched from that porch, every hand held in comfort, every brave choice to love despite the risk. They found each other in the darkness and cold, and together they built something warm and bright that would shine long after they were gone. And that is how a frightened young woman running from danger fell into a frozen creek, was pulled out and warmed by a cowboy, and found not just survival, but a life more beautiful than she'd ever dared to dream.